It was a cold winter evening. The streets were covered in a thick layer of snow, and the wind howled through the empty alleyways. People hurried home, wrapped in warm coats, trying to escape the bitter cold. Streetlights flickered, casting long, dark shadows on the pavement. The city was alive with activity, cars rushing by, honking horns, people walking briskly to their destinations. The cold was biting, the kind that crept into your bones, making even the strongest of people hurry their steps and search for warmth. In the heart of the city, there was a well-known restaurant, a place where wealthy businessmen held meetings, where families gathered for celebrations, and where couples enjoyed romantic dinners. The lights inside were warm and inviting, and the smell of freshly cooked meals filled the air. It was the kind of place where the plates were made of fine porcelain, the silverware shined under the soft chandeliers, and the food was arranged like a work of art, pleasing to the eye before it even touched your lips. There were always people dining here, guests who expected only the best. The atmosphere was rich with the clink of fine china, the murmur of soft conversation, and the quiet rustling of menus. Inside, the restaurant was nearly full, with waiters rushing between tables, carrying expensive dishes and pouring fine wine into crystal glasses. Laughter and conversation blended into a comforting hum. Soft music played in the background, adding to the refined and elegant ambience. Every table was occupied, and the staff moved like a well-oiled machine, ensuring everything ran smoothly. A table near the back was filled with a group of businessmen discussing the latest market trends, while a couple in the corner whispered sweet nothings to each other. It was the epitome of class, a place where no one would ever imagine anything out of the ordinary happening. Then, suddenly, the heavy wooden doors swung open. The force of the cold wind gusted into the warm interior, and everyone turned to look. The chimes above the door jingled softly, signaling the sudden change in the air. A chill ran through the room as the outside frost seemed to creep in, sending a shiver down the spines of the diners. A few people pulled their coats tighter around them, instinctively trying to shield themselves from the cold air. And in that very moment, everyone in the restaurant was pulled from their conversations and into an unfamiliar, unexpected situation. A girl stood there. She couldn't have been older than 10 or 11, but her eyes were wide with a certain kind of understanding that you wouldn't expect from someone so young. She was small, thin, and clearly homeless. Her clothes were ragged and much too thin for the brutal winter outside. The coat she wore was torn, and the fabric was worn thin from use. Her shoes, though once probably new, were now falling apart, the soles barely holding together. Her hair was tangled, unwashed, and partially covered by a threadbare scarf. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her small hands, clutching each other tightly in front of her, were nearly frozen. For a few seconds, there was silence. The kind of silence that precedes something important, when everyone realizes that something is about to happen but no one quite knows what. Then, whispers began to spread across the room. Who is she? Where are her parents? What is she doing here? Some customers turned away, uncomfortable. Others exchanged concerned glances. It wasn't often that someone from the streets wandered into such an upscale establishment. But the girl was standing there, in the middle of the restaurant, looking around with wide eyes as though she had never seen anything so luxurious in her life. A waiter, a young man in a crisp uniform, quickly approached her. He was tall, his dark hair neatly combed, his face the picture of professionalism, but his eyes held a glimmer of confusion as he sized up the girl. His voice was polite but firm, as it would be to any customer, but something in the tone seemed off. He was unsure of how to handle the situation. "Miss, you can't be here. This is a private establishment," he said, but his words hung awkwardly in the air, unsure of themselves. The girl looked up at him, her lips trembling as she tried to find the right words. She seemed smaller now that she was standing before him, her nervousness evident. She took a deep breath, as though she had been preparing for this moment for a long time, and then she spoke. "Please. I just want to help." The waiter blinked in surprise. Help? The girl nodded quickly. I can clean tables. I can wash dishes. I'll do anything. Just, please let me work for some food. A heavy silence fell over the restaurant. It wasn't the kind of request one would expect to hear in a place like this. People exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure of how to respond. Some frowned, others shook their heads, and a few seemed to pretend they hadn't heard at all. A well-dressed man in the corner scoffed and muttered, "Ridiculous." The restaurant manager, an older man with silver hair and a crisp suit, walked up. He had been in charge of the restaurant for over 30 years. His name was Mr. Reynolds, and he was known for his strict professionalism. He was a man who valued reputation above all else, and a situation like this, with a homeless child asking to work for food, was far from acceptable in his eyes. He approached the girl with an air of authority, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "This is not a charity, young lady," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We don't hire." Before he could finish, an elderly woman sitting at a nearby table stood up. She had been quietly observing the scene, and now, her eyes locked onto the young girl. There was something different in her gaze, something soft and understanding. The woman was dressed elegantly, with a pearl necklace and a tailored coat that spoke of a life well lived. But there was warmth in her expression, and her eyes glowed with the kind of kindness that seemed rare in a world where people often turned away from the suffering of others. "What's your name, dear?" the elderly woman asked gently, stepping forward to address the girl. Her voice was calm and soothing, as if she had seen the world for what it was and yet still found room for kindness. The girl hesitated, her small body shivering from the cold and the overwhelming attention she was receiving. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to the ground before she answered softly. "Lena." The woman nodded, as if the name meant something to her. "Lena, are you alone?" Lena swallowed again, a tremor in her voice. "My parents, they're gone," she whispered. "I have no one." A murmur spread through the restaurant at her words. Some looked sympathetic, others merely curious, and a few even glanced at the woman, wondering what she would do next. The manager sighed, rubbing his temple, clearly not knowing how to handle the situation. "I'm sorry, but we can't just let anyone walk in and, I'll pay for her meal." The room went silent again. The elderly woman's voice was steady and unwavering, like the calm in the eye of a storm. She stepped forward, her gaze unwavering, her stance firm. "I'll pay for her meal," she repeated, her voice carrying with it a sense of finality. She turned to the girl and gave her a warm, inviting smile. "Come, sit with me." Lena's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this. She had been prepared for rejection, for the cold dismissal that so often came with being poor, with being invisible. But this woman, this kind woman, was offering something no one else had. I don't want charity," Lena said quickly, almost in a panic. "I want to work. I don't want handouts." The woman studied her for a moment, as if seeing something deeper within her than just a homeless child. Then, turning to the manager, she spoke again. "Why don't we let her prove herself?" The manager hesitated, and for a long moment, it seemed as though he was about to refuse. But something in the woman's eyes made him pause, just long enough for him to reconsider. He glanced at the other staff, who were all watching with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Finally, he sighed. "Fine. One night. She can help clean tables. If she causes trouble, she's out." Lena's face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you so much." And so, for the first time in her life, Lena had a job. She worked hard that evening. She wiped down tables, picked up plates, and even helped a clumsy waiter carry a tray. She was small, and her hands were freezing, but she didn't complain. Every time she stumbled, she got back up. Every time someone looked at her with doubt, she worked even harder. The night wore on. The restaurant was closing down, and most of the customers had already left. But Lena kept working, cleaning the last tables, making sure everything was in place. She was exhausted, her hands sore from scrubbing, but she didn't stop. She had finally found something to hold on to. When the restaurant was finally closing, and only a few of the staff remained, the manager walked up to her. "You did good, kid," he said, his tone softer than it had been all night. "But this was a one-time thing." Lena nodded, understanding. She had expected nothing more than a temporary job, a brief escape from the harshness of her life. But then, something happened that no one saw coming. The elderly woman, the one who had stood up for Lena, spoke again. "I'd like to talk to you, Lena. If you're willing." Lena hesitated, then followed her to a quiet corner of the restaurant. "I lost my daughter many years ago," the woman said softly. "She was about your age when she passed away. I have spent years alone, with no one to care for." She reached into her purse and pulled out a card. "This is my address. If you ever need help, if you ever need a home, my door is open." Lena stared at the card, then back at the woman. Tears welled in her eyes. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for me?" The woman smiled, her eyes shining with warmth. "Because no child should be alone in this world." Lena couldn't stop the tears from falling. For the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. And at that moment, everyone in the restaurant who had ignored her, who had whispered about her, who had doubted her, felt something, too. Shame. Because a little girl had walked in that night, desperate and hungry, and they had turned away. But one woman, one kind soul, had changed everything. Lena never forgot that night. And neither did anyone who was there. Because sometimes, kindness comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, a single act of compassion can change a life forever.
Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, share it with your friends so more people can feel the power of kindness. Leave your comments below, I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Take care of yourself and those around you.